You can feel it, can't you? Something is shifting, something is moving. For decades, we've lived in a world where Washington called the shots, where decisions made in the halls of the U.S., capital echoed across continents, shaping markets, wars, and alliances. But this week, this moment, India just made a move that caught Washington flat-footed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't reckless, it was deliberate. And it was powerful. This is not just another headline on a busy news day. This is not just another diplomatic visit or a handshake photo op or some symbolic gesture to make the evening news. What we just witnessed is proof that global power is no longer a one-way street. The balance is tilting. The world's center of gravity is shifting eastward, and India is stepping into its role as one of the architects of the future. Now, some of you might be thinking, we've heard this before. People have been talking about the rise of Asia for years, but this moment is different. This is not about projections or forecasts. This is about action. India has taken a decisive step that says, we are not waiting for anyone's approval. And the world noticed, the U.S. noticed. Think about what it means when the most powerful nation on earth gets surprised. It means they weren't ready. It means someone else was 2 steps ahead. And that's exactly what happened here. India didn't just play defense. It made a strategic, calculated power move. One that forced Washington to pay attention, to recalibrate, to react. And in the world of geopolitics, forcing your rival to react is the ultimate sign that you're winning. But let's be very clear, this is not about confrontation. This is not about replacing one empire with another. It's about balance. It's about voice. It's about a nation with more than 1 billion people saying, we are ready to be heard. We are ready to lead. And that matters. It matters for trade. It matters for technology. It matters for security. And it matters for the values that will define the century ahead. Here's the thing most people miss: power is never just about tanks or aircraft carriers. Real power is the ability to set the agenda, to make others talk about what you want to talk about. For decades, the U.S. had that privilege almost exclusively. Today, India has claimed it. And when a country claims that power and backs it up with action, the world takes notice. So what do we do with this? Do we panic? Do we retreat? No, we recognize reality. We recognize that we are entering a multipolar world where ideas, innovation, and influence are coming from everywhere. And that is not something to fear. That is something to prepare for, something to engage with. And let's be honest, there will be those who try to dismiss this moment, who try to spin it as a fluke or an overreaction. But history won't dismiss it. History will mark this as the point when India's ascent was no longer just potential. It was undeniable. If you're listening right now, I want you to feel the weight of this moment, because this is not just a story about 2 countries or even 2 continents. This is a story about how the world works and how fast it can change. Power doesn't just shift quietly. Sometimes it shocks the system. And when it does, you can't go back to pretending things are the same. That's where we are today. We are standing in the middle of a moment that will be remembered years from now, maybe decades from now, as the point where the global order tilted, where India said, we're here and we're not waiting for permission. And let me tell you something, moments like this don't come often. They don't wait around. They challenge us to wake up, to look around, to see what's really happening. Because power, real power, is not given, it is taken. And today the world just watched India take it. If we really want to understand what just happened, we have to look beyond the headlines and into the strategy, because this was not a lucky break. This was not an accidental power grab. This was the result of years, decades, really, of positioning, building, and planning. India has been quietly strengthening its economy, investing in its technology sector, educating a generation of innovators, and building a domestic market so vast that it can no longer be ignored. Let's start with the economy. India is now one of the fastest growing major economies in the world. And that growth is not just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's factories humming, startups launching, infrastructure rising, millions of people entering the middle class every year. That is purchasing power. That is consumer demand. That is economic muscle that rivals any global player. And when you have that kind of leverage, you don't sit quietly at the back of the room. You stand up, you speak, and people listen. And technology. Well, just think about the scale. Some of the brightest engineers in Silicon Valley were trained in India. Some of the biggest names in global tech, from Google to Microsoft, are run by Indian-born CEOs. That's not just a talent pool, that's a talent wave. And it's changing the rules of the game, because today, in a world where innovation is the new oil, India has become one of the world's biggest producers. But here's the key. India didn't just rely on its size. It turned its size into strategy. It understood that in the 21st century, power isn't just about who has the biggest military. It's about who can control supply chains, who can attract investment, who can shape digital infrastructure, who can bring others to the negotiating table. And in this latest move, India did exactly that. Think about what that signals to the world. It says, we know our value. It says, we will use our economic weight to shape outcomes, not just accept them. And that is what stuns Washington, because Washington is used to being the one making the offer, setting the terms, writing the rules. Suddenly, it's India that is saying, here's how we want to do this. Take it or leave it. And let me tell you, that takes courage. It takes vision. It takes a willingness to risk short-term comfort for long-term gain. But that's what leaders do. They take calculated risks. They don't wait until every variable is perfect. They act when they know the moment is right. And India's timing could not have been better. You see, the global economy is at an inflection point. The world is rethinking where it gets its energy, where it builds its products, where it places its trust. Alliances are shifting, supply chains are being rewired, and everyone is looking for partners they can count on. By making this move now, India has positioned itself as not just a participant, but as a hub, a place where decisions are made, where deals are struck, where the future is negotiated. And that's why this is so much bigger than a single agreement or policy change. This is a message to every capital in the world. Delhi is not waiting to be invited into the room. Delhi is building its own room and asking others to join. So where does that leave the United States? Well, it leaves it with a choice. Engage with India as an equal, or risk being left behind as the global map redraws itself. And I think we all know which path will ultimately be chosen, because ignoring this level of momentum is not an option. But I want to be clear, this isn't just about geopolitics. It's about what it teaches us, because strategy is not just for nations, it's for all of us. It's about building your own leverage. It's about knowing your worth. It's about positioning yourself so that when the right moment comes, you are ready to step forward and say, this is my move. That's what India just did. And in doing so, it didn't just change its own destiny. It changed the conversation for the entire world. Because when a nation of 1.4 billion people makes a decision like this, it's not just a headline, it's a declaration. And the declaration is loud and clear. This is no longer a future we are waiting for. This is a future we are shaping. What makes this moment even more remarkable is that India didn't just play by the old rules of the game, it challenged them. For decades, the rules of international politics and trade were written by a handful of Western capitals. Those rules decided who could trade, who could invest, who could build, who could rise. And for a long time, countries like India had to adjust, to bend, to compromise in order to be part of that system. But not anymore. This latest move was more than a diplomatic maneuver. It was a statement that the old playbook no longer applies. India didn't just participate, it rewrote the script. It said, we will no longer be the junior partner. We will no longer be told to wait our turn. And the world heard that loud and clear. This is what makes it such a shock to Washington. Because Washington has been used to setting the pace. For decades, the U.S. has led the orchestra, deciding when the music starts and when it stops. But India just changed the rhythm, and now everyone has to adjust to its beat. And let me tell you, that takes a rare kind of courage. You see, there's a cost to breaking the old rules. It comes with criticism. It comes with risk. It comes with being told that you're moving too fast, that you should be careful, that you should wait until everyone else is comfortable. But history doesn't belong to those who wait. History belongs to those who are willing to disrupt the status quo, who are willing to take the backlash, who are willing to walk into a room full of doubters and still stand tall. And that is exactly what India just did. It refused to be boxed in by outdated expectations. It refused to be trapped by a system designed in another century for another world. Instead, It took the pen and started writing the rules for the world we are living in now, a world defined by data, by technology, by interconnected markets, by the aspirations of billions who will no longer settle for being spectators. This is not just an economic story. It is a cultural and psychological shift. When a nation breaks the old rules, it sends a message to its own people. You don't have to be limited by what came before you. You don't have to live within someone else's lines. You can redraw them. And that is a powerful message for a country with the largest youth population in the world, young men and women who are hungry for opportunity, for innovation, for change. But let's be clear, this isn't recklessness. This is calculated defiance. It's strategic. It's about creating space where there was no space before. And that's what truly stuns observers, because most nations talk about change, but very few have the confidence to make it happen on their own terms. And here's the thing, once the rules are broken, once the precedent is set, there's no going back. The next time India steps into a negotiation, into a summit, into a global forum, it won't be as a quiet participant. It will be as a nation that has already proven it can lead, that can hold its ground, that can walk away from the table if the terms are not right. That kind of leverage changes everything. This is why this moment matters far beyond policy circles. Because what India just did will inspire others, other nations, other leaders, other movements to say, if they can stand up, so can we. And that is when you begin to see a true shift in the global order. So when we talk about India breaking the old rules, we're not talking about a single act of rebellion. We're talking about a turning point, the moment when a country outgrew the role it was handed and demanded a bigger one. And that changes not just India's story. It changes the story for everyone watching. Because once you see someone break free, you start to believe you can too. And that is what makes this moment dangerous for those who are comfortable and exhilarating for those who are ready to rise. The rules have been rewritten, the stage has been reset, and the world will never play by the old script again. The message could not be clearer. India is no longer content to sit quietly while others speak for it. It is no longer satisfied with being called the world's largest democracy, as though that is just a statistic to be admired from afar. It is using its voice, loud, clear, and unshaken, to say to the West, we are not followers, we are leaders now. And that is exactly why this moment feels so electric. Because this is not just about policy or trade agreements, it is about respect. For years, India has been asked to play its part, to be a reliable partner, to support the global order. But those phrases often came with an unspoken assumption that the global order was something designed elsewhere, that India's role was simply to uphold it, not to shape it. Well, that assumption has just been shattered. When India acts on its own terms, when it negotiates not as a recipient but as an equal, when it has the confidence to say no, that is when the balance changes. And make no mistake, Washington heard this message. The State Department heard it, the Pentagon heard it, the White House heard it, because this was not subtle. It was bold enough to send a ripple through every power corridor in the West. This is how leadership is asserted, not with bluster, not with reckless provocation, but with calm, deliberate action that forces the world to take notice. And when that happens, the conversation shifts. Instead of asking what India can do for the global system, leaders will now have to ask what the global system can do with India at the helm. There is something incredibly powerful about watching a nation find its voice like this. It's almost like watching a person who has spent years in the background finally step into the spotlight, not timidly, not apologetically, but fully owning their presence. That is what India is doing right now. And when a country of that size, with that history, with that potential, decides to lead, the world cannot look away. And here's what's fascinating. This leadership is not about abandoning the West or rejecting partnerships. It is about resetting the terms. It is about saying, we are open to working with you, but we will not work for you. We will collaborate, but we will not be commanded. That's not defiance for the sake of defiance. That is dignity. That is self-respect on a national scale. And this moment matters not just for India and the United States, but for every country watching closely. Because when a nation as large as India changes its posture, everyone else has to adjust theirs. Allies rethink their strategies. Rivals recalculate their moves. Suddenly, there's a new gravitational center pulling the conversation in a different direction. And for the West, this is a wake-up call, because the choice is no longer whether to engage with India. The choice is how to engage, as a patron or as a partner, as a mentor or as a peer. The old dynamic is gone and there is no turning back. But let's take a step back and recognize what it takes to do this. It takes decades of preparation, yes, but it also takes nerve. It takes the ability to stare down the possibility of pushback and do it anyway. That is the essence of leadership, the willingness to absorb the criticism that comes with taking a stand. And when India does that, it doesn't just inspire other nations, it inspires people, individuals who are watching, listening, taking notes. Because if a country can walk into the room and demand to be taken seriously, maybe so can you. Maybe you don't have to accept the first offer. Maybe you don't have to stay silent just because that's what's expected of you. That's the deeper lesson in all of this. It's not just geopolitics. It's a reminder that the world respects those who respect themselves. And when you speak with clarity, with confidence, with conviction, you force others to listen. Right now, India has the floor. The world is listening. And the message is unmistakable. The era of quiet compliance is over, and the era of self-determined leadership has begun. What's happening right now isn't confined to a single moment between India and the United States. This is much bigger than that. The effects of this move are going to travel far beyond Washington and New Delhi. This is a ripple effect that will touch every corner of the globe, from Brussels to Beijing, from Tokyo to Nairobi. Because when a player of India's size makes a decisive move, the entire board shifts. You can already feel the recalibration beginning. In Europe, leaders are watching closely, asking themselves how this changes their own relationships, not just with India, but with each other. They know that a stronger India could be the partner they need to balance both American power and Chinese influence. They know that the world's supply chains, already strained by years of crisis, could now be reshaped with India at the center, not just as a low-cost producer, but as a true innovator, a hub of decision-making. In Asia, the impact is even more immediate. Neighbors who once measured their moves against Beijing alone are now realizing they have two centers of gravity to consider. Japan, Australia, Indonesia. They all have to think differently about their alliances. And China, of course, is watching with the sharpest eyes of all. Because for years, Beijing has assumed that it was the uncontested rising power in the East. Now it sees that the story is more complicated, that there is another heavyweight, another vision of leadership, one that is democratic, one that is willing to challenge the idea that only authoritarian systems can deliver growth and power. And this is where the moment becomes truly historic. Because it's not just about economics or trade, it's about the kind of future we want to build. It's about whether the 21st century will be shaped by open societies or closed ones, by shared opportunity or by concentrated power. India's move reminds the world that democracy can be dynamic, that it can be ambitious, that it can be bold. And don't underestimate the psychological impact of this moment. For countries across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, nations that have often been told to take their cues from the West, seeing India stand tall is a reminder that they too have choices. They too can set their own terms. They too can demand partnerships rather than dependency. That is how a single act can become a catalyst for a new global era. This is what ripple effects look like. They start small, a decision, a statement, a bold move, but they keep spreading, reshaping perceptions, rewriting strategies, opening doors that were once locked. And before long, what started as a shock becomes the new normal. Now, that can be unsettling for those who were comfortable with the old order. It can be disorienting for those who built their strategies on assumptions that no longer hold true. But that is the nature of history. It doesn't wait for anyone to be ready. It moves forward. And right now, it is moving fast. And here's the thing, the world doesn't just watch these moments. It responds to them. Businesses respond by shifting investments. Diplomats respond by redrawing alliances. Ordinary people respond by rethinking what is possible. And every one of those responses amplifies the original move, turning a single act of leadership into a global cascade of change. That is why this moment will be studied years from now, not as an isolated event, but as the beginning of a new phase in global politics. Because from this point forward, no one can afford to underestimate India's capacity to act boldly. No one can assume that it will simply follow. And no one can deny that its choices now have the power to reshape the world. And so as these ripples spread, as alliances shift, as strategies are rewritten, one thing is certain: we are witnessing the dawn of a new global reality. The world map may not look different yet, but the balance of influence has already changed. The shockwaves have been felt. The ripple has become a wave. And there is no stopping it now. When we watch a moment like this unfold on the world stage, it's tempting to treat it like a spectator sport, as if it's something happening out there, far away from our own lives. But here's the truth: this moment is not just about India, not just about the United States, not just about geopolitics. It's about what it teaches us about courage, about timing, about stepping into power when the world least expects it. Because isn't that what so many of us struggle with? We wait, we hesitate. We tell ourselves we'll make our move when we're more ready, when we've gathered more information, when we're absolutely sure the risk is gone. But the world doesn't reward hesitation. It rewards action. And what India has done is show us in real time what it looks like to stop asking for permission and start claiming your place. Think about it. India could have stayed quiet. It could have waited another decade, played it safe, followed the lead of bigger players, kept its head down, but it didn't. It looked at its economy, its population, its technology, its growing influence, and it decided that waiting was no longer an option. It decided that the risk of staying small was greater than the risk of standing tall. And that is not just a lesson for nations. That is a lesson for every single one of us. Because every person listening right now has a move they've been holding back, a conversation they've been afraid to have, a decision they've been putting off, a dream they've been keeping on the shelf. Maybe it's starting that business. Maybe it's leaving the job that's crushing your spirit. Maybe it's speaking up in the room where you've been quiet for too long. Maybe it's finally admitting that you want more influence, more freedom, more purpose. What India's power move reminds us is that waiting doesn't make the leap easier. It just makes you later. The longer you wait, the more you convince yourself that you can't, that it's too hard, that someone else will do it first. But the truth is, there is no perfect moment. There is only the moment you choose. And when you choose boldly, when you act decisively, the world reacts. People who doubted you start to take you seriously. People who underestimated you start to rethink their assumptions. And suddenly, you're not just playing the game, you're changing it. That's what this entire moment is about. It's not just about international strategy. It's about the psychology of power. It's about proving that when you stop waiting for the old order to give you a seat, you can build your own table. And once you've built it, no one can deny you. This is why I believe this moment is so personal for so many people watching. It gives permission, not the kind you have to beg for, but the kind you claim for yourself. It shows that it's possible to turn potential into leverage, leverage into action, and action into transformation. And yes, it's scary, it's uncomfortable, it's messy, but so is every breakthrough. So is every revolution, personal or political. The fear doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. The fear means you're doing something that matters. So I want to ask you, what would your own power move look like? What would it look like if you stopped shrinking to fit someone else's expectations? What would it look like if you stopped waiting for the right conditions, the right approval, the right timing, and just decided to act? Because that's what this moment is challenging you to do. Not just to watch history, but to write your own. Not just to be impressed by someone else's courage, but to summon your own. The world is changing right now in front of our eyes. The map of influence is being redrawn, and whether you're a country or a single person with a single dream, you have a choice. Stand still and let it pass you by, or step forward and be part of shaping what comes next. And if India can do it, if a nation of 1.4 billion people can look at the world's most powerful nations and say, it's our time, then so can you. Because history doesn't wait, and neither should you.